So my name is Denise MacGiollari, and thanks for the introduction. Delighted to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to share some of my research. So just going to move on to this. Let me just, sorry, just a moment. I just closed down this chat area so I can see the screen. And just let me, sorry, now I just need to get my screen back up and running. Okay, so yeah, my name is Denise MacGiollari. I'm teaching in AIT. I have been teaching in social care and early years since 2002, but before that I was a ceramicist, moving into art therapy, working in social care in Dublin for a number of years before then moving into teaching in social care. And now I'm a PhD candidate in Lancaster University with Natasha Lakovic as my supervisor. So this research presentation introduces the research about threshold graphics as a pedagogy based on inquiry graphics theory by Natasha Lakovic in the area of social care education. So social care profession in Ireland, this is the definition. Basically, we train people to work with those who are marginalized or disadvantaged, have special needs. It's a broad area. So our students may work in the area of homelessness or addiction and those kinds of areas. And the objective really is to help those that they're working with achieve their maximum potential. So within social care education, then there are a couple of core modules that you'll find in nearly all social care degrees across the country in Ireland: sociology, psychology, policy, professional practice, law, creative studies, and research methods, and then quite a substantial number of hours in practice placement under supervision. So, back to threshold concepts, then, threshold concept theory evoked quite a number of visual metaphors. So the question here is, why not use these visual imageries in teaching concepts? So we have the tunnel there, we have liquid learning, and we have the portal idea. And even the threshold is an actual visual metaphor in itself. So why use images to explore concepts? Well, students are receptive to images. They're exposed to social media all the time. There's an ever-increasing culture of the visual. We live in a very fast world. We're expected to respond automatically. And that is a problem because that exposure can be without any critical visual skills. So we may be influenced, that images are not innocent, but are carriers of messengers. And, the purpose of this research is to try and think about how we can slow that down and use that semiotic thinking process like inquiry graphics and threshold graphics to explore that. So I searched for older people in care as a kind of a point of this, and these are the images that came up. And I just want you to spend just a couple of moments just looking at the images and just to see, what is the message here? What are the signs being used here to convey a message? So maybe at the end of the presentation, you might give me some, or you might put it in the chat if you want to do that now. And I'll return to it at the end about what are the messages being conveyed here. So this was, a tweet about a week or two ago from somebody who said they were sick and tired of lazy, patronizing and dehumanizing stock imagery of older people accompanying stories. And they had this image. So just give you some kind of idea about where we're going with this presentation. So inquiry graphics, I know Natasha in the last presentation went into quite a bit about it, so I won't go into too much more detail here, just to say that my research is focusing on photographs and it's based on semiotics. So threshold graphics, again, and Natasha went into a good bit of detail there, but it's the marriage really between semiotic theory, inquiry graphics, and threshold concepts. So inquiry graphics then uses a semiotic icon symbol index thinking. And in this case, it's applied to photographs as threshold graphics to research troublesome concept, troublesome knowledge. And that's how I used it in my research. So threshold graphics potential then, the semiotic thinking for teaching and learning threshold concepts. So, the potential here is to externalize the learner's interpretations, both personal and collective, and to reveal those knowledge gaps that might not be, it might not be available in any other way. And those gaps can be identified by introducing educator introducing images, or the student bringing images in then that might kind of reveal some of that troublesomeness with concepts. So the research focus here then, threshold concepts in the area of social care and inquiry graphics, threshold graphics. And then the research questions, to look at what are the threshold concepts in social care subjects by 4 user groups: educators, knowledge contributors, current students, and recent graduates. And the potential then of inquiry graphics, teaching, learning method, threshold graphics within social care. So the participants, just to say that this, I'm just in the middle of analysing all the material I have. So this part is all finished and I'm into analysis. So I'm getting the preliminary findings from this. But there was 45 participants in total over a year and a half of work. So the interview protocol, the beginning of the interview was a career and educational journey, information about that. And then the participant provided an image, and we explored that using the inquiry graphics framework, which I'll introduce to you in a few moments. And then the researcher provided images. Again, we would just explore that using the inquiry graphics framework. And then at the end, there was questions evaluating the IG research and pedagogy. So these were the researcher provided photographs that I introduced. And for this presentation, I'm going to focus on TGA. So I'm going to give you a little bit of detail on the findings that came from this particular image within the interview. So 92 images were submitted for analysis, quite a number from all the different participants. So a number of participants submitted quite a few. Educators and knowledge contributors submitted images representing a conceptual difficulty for students, and students and graduates submitted images representing an uncomfortable learning experience encountered in their social care education. So this is the inquiry graphics framework for threshold graphics that I use. So it's a photo elicitation method, and we worked our way across from this side over with listing the elements, moving to description, to meaning, then on to more detailed about the meaning, and then on to the objective, which was the concepts. What concepts were coming from the image? How did they feel about them? Was there difficulties? Was there conceptual difficulty with that concept? So that gave rich and varied response. So these were some of the responses to image A. So these are the concepts that were identified. So the numbers beside the concepts are the numbers of people who identified those particular concepts. So 24 participants identified domestic violence as being a concept, and also a difficult one. Silencing was also one there, gender, sexual assault, supervision, and you can see the varied and multiple different kinds of concepts that originated from one image. So this was the TGA, is the prompted emotional response. So you can see there that 4 people thought that felt it was uncomfortable. 6 people said it brought up fear. Another said it was negative. Other persons brought sympathy, anger, frustration, curiosity. It was horrifying, disquiet, stress, sadness, empathy. So quite a number of emotional responses to the image. And this was an unprompted, where the person would say they wanted to do something. So 4 said they wanted to help, 1 wanted to act, 1 wanted to resolve, 1 wanted to go in and take that hand down. So, that was another response to the image. So these were concepts that were generated through discussion then. So you can see the varied kinds of concepts that emerged from discussion about all the images. So creativity, challenging behavior, mental health and illness. You can see the varied ones. So this is an example of an educator submitted image, and it's called Spiderweb After Rain. And the concept that the educator wanted to talk about was the relationships in the journey through the care system. And the difficulty that they identified with students was the complexity of multiple relationships and getting that student to step into being cared for by the state system position and what that's like. So this was another example of an image where these were personal items, glasses, photographs, dentures, a religious picture. And the concept that the educator wanted to talk about was the medical model and the stripping an individual of their identity. And then the historic origins of institutional care, and particularly in Ireland, as this is a very live issue, where the origins of care still resonate today, not only in care and education, but also within society with reports coming out of institutional abuse, and trying to get students to relate and connect emotionally with what it must feel like to be in an institution of that time. So this was an image then from an educator as well about seascape with lighthouses. The text is the Serenity Prayer, and the concept here was about change, and the difficulty was the limitation of change and that you can't change everything. And that was difficult for students because they often come in with idealized wanting to change things, wanting to help, and realizing that there may be limitations to what they can do. The lighthouse being represented here as a metaphor for guiding, being there, but perhaps not getting into the water with somebody. The waters may be rough and maybe stormy and so on. So this is an example of a graduate image. Again, I've just blotted out in case, just to keep it on anonymity, but they actually went back to their first place of where they were first placement and took a photograph. And they wanted to talk about the concept of challenging behavior and change, and their shock and naivety of first placement and going in and having to work with people who had challenging behavior. And then the other concept was how slow the work can be in social care, that some things don't get fixed completely in social care, again in that same theme of change. So this is another example of a student image, a man being washed by a female. The concept here the student wanted to talk about was personal care and gender roles in personal care being unfair, no dignity, sexual arousal, no training, embarrassment and shame, and discretion and no support. So the early findings here then, the concepts were described either as experiential, embodied or sensed, or theoretical and conceptual. So for example, concepts of abuse and violence were either deeply enmeshed with personal experience posing difficulties of a detachment, or totally abstract, such as political systems without any obvious connection to the students' lives. So for example, personal experience, sometimes students would come into class and they would realize suddenly that the theory that was being discussed in sociology or psychology was connecting very strongly with their own experience of life, and maybe even an idealistic view of life. And the abstract might be to do with policy, where housing policy, they may not realize that actually has an impact on their lives. So these kinds of things does need a focused methodological approach, such as an IG or TG, to identify and work through these kinds of troublesomeness, to operationalize those concepts as a professional social care worker. So this is again a work in progress, but essentially I see these two kinds of ends of a spectrum where the challenge is not connected to their lives, so it's difficult to conceptualize, and the other is being too connected to their lives, so there's an uncomfortableness in terms of that. So the teaching approaches coming out of those two things are, on the one side we have the abstract, making it relevant, building a foundation of basic concepts, connecting to the social care role, repetition, and the danger here then is rote learning and detachment. And on the other side, it's the teaching approaches to encourage and support self-work and reflective practice, and challenging positions, that they need to be challenged, and reveal self to others, offer support and reassurance. And the risk here is to close off the personal, become detached. And another risk here is actually to have a dual, working dual, where they hold dual positions that are contradictory. And then the mature student might have
about
more.
5 minutes.
Okay, thanks. The mature student might have more life experience to draw on than the younger students, but the mature students may be more fixed, whereas the younger students might be more idealized in terms of their view of life. So I see it kind of as a concept, that threshold being in and out, the relevance to out being the relevance to lives and social care work, and in being about healing, reorientation, reconceptualizing and reframing. And then concepts are both abstract and concrete and embodied. They're not separate. So, as human beings, where knowledge can never be separated from experience if it was to be fully explored and comprehended. And, the other thing that came out of this was how underutilized and trivialized images are within academic practices. And we just see a couple of responses from the educators on what they thought of using images like threshold graphics. So one educator thought it was a natural fit. They had thought of it before. It was something they will probably use again. They're exploring concepts. A student thought, they recognized the multiplicity of concept understanding and interpretation, that people could have different views of something. One student thought it could identify prejudices and maybe overcome those. Another student thought it could bring up, those images could bring about a certain emotional awareness, that they might see a person in a wheelchair and feel sad, but they might not have realized that that's how they feel. Another graduate thought it might be useful for reflexive critical thinking that is different from book learning or other kinds of information. And again, this was another thing about triggering personal experiences, that they need to be care about how images might be used, particularly as it may bring up sort of material that the classroom where the might. So it's about keeping discussions safe, and the time element involved in doing this sort of work. So the key messages then is it offers a critical reflective opportunity to explore cultural and social science using semiotic thinking. It actively utilizes the embodied self as a constructor of knowledge, such as self-worlds interacting with the Umfeld, excuse my German. You'll see on the next slide, I've just have a model on that. It makes the visual world visible as a resource for knowledge formation. It positions the visual modes as a legitimate knowledge sources and generators, and it develops a critical lens through which the social care student can question, evaluate, and action if necessary. And it brings divergent meanings into the classroom for a rich and multi-conceptual discussion. So this is kind of my model at the moment about how I'm thinking about this, about how learning happens, and the idea of the self-worlds interacting with other self-worlds, and learning happening between all kinds of different interactions, and difficulties then being kind of blocks or held off, difficulties like resistance and so on like that. So that's just a model in progress. So thank you very much.